The photograph measures less than 4 inches wide. The paper is brittle, yellowed at the edges, and smells faintly of dust and old wood. It was taken in New Orleans, Louisiana, in the spring of 1870, just 5 years after the end of the Civil War, during a moment in American history when freedom was new, fragile, and fiercely guarded. In it, a black family of 5 poses with uncommon dignity. The father stands tall at the left, his jaw set with quiet pride, one hand resting on the shoulder of his wife, who sits with perfect composure in the center. Behind them, a plain studio backdrop. Around them, there are 3 children, ages 8, 5, and 3, dressed in clothes that seem far too fine, far too deliberate, for a family that history should have forgotten. For over a century, the photograph sat in a private archive, uncatalogued, unseen. Then a researcher zoomed in, and what she found in the eyes of the youngest child, a 3-year-old boy sitting on his mother's lap, staring directly into the camera, stopped her cold. One eye dark brown, one eye pale green, and that single biological detail would unravel a mystery stretching back 200 years, crossing an ocean, and rewriting the story of a family that history tried its hardest to erase. Before we begin, do you feel there's untapped potential within you? Then click the link in the first pinned comment and discover ancestral knowledge about mind, consciousness, and personal transformation for those seeking a life with more purpose and clarity. And if the story moves you, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It helps more people find stories like this one. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March 2019, and Dr. Nadia Osei almost didn't answer it. She was in the middle of grading undergraduate papers at Howard University's Department of Genetics and African Diaspora Studies, a dual appointment that most of her colleagues still found unusual, though she had long stopped trying to explain it. For Nadia, genetics and history were not separate disciplines. They were the same conversation, spoken in different languages. The call was from a colleague at the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans, a man named Professor Roland Tate, who had spent the last 30 years cataloging documents related to Black life in the post-Civil War South. His voice, when she picked up, had the careful, restrained quality of someone trying not to sound too excited. "I found something," he said, "in a private donation we received last year from an estate in Treme. A photograph. I think you need to see it." Nadia flew to New Orleans 3 days later. The Amistad Research Center occupied a set of rooms inside Tilton Hall at Tulane University, and Roland met her at the entrance with the photograph already in his hands, sealed inside an acid-free archival sleeve. He held it the way you hold something you're not entirely sure is real. The image itself was a carte de visite, a small card-mounted photograph popular in the 1860s and 1870s, produced in professional studios and exchanged like calling cards among families who could afford them. That alone was notable. Black families in New Orleans in 1870, just 5 years after emancipation, were not, as a rule, the clients of professional photographers. The family in the image was composed with obvious care. The father, a broad-shouldered man in a dark wool jacket, stood at the left with a stillness that suggested he was accustomed to being watched. His wife sat in a high-backed chair at the center, wearing a dress with careful pleating at the collar. 3 children surrounded them, 2 older boys standing behind and a smaller child, clearly the youngest, seated in his mother's lap. Nadia studied the photograph for a long moment without speaking. Then Roland handed her the magnifying loupe. "Look at the youngest one," he said quietly. "Look at his eyes." She pressed the loupe to the photograph, leaned in, and felt the air leave her lungs. The child's right eye was dark brown. His left eye was pale green. "The donation came with a handwritten note," he said, setting a small folded paper on the table beside the archival sleeve. "The family who donated it said it had been passed down for 4 generations. Best estimate from the paper stock and photographic process is 1868 to 1872. New Orleans, almost certainly." Nadia looked back at the photograph. The child in the image was perhaps 2 or 3 years old, seated sideways on his mother's lap, with his face turned directly toward the camera. His expression was solemn. Most children in photographs of that era were, given the long exposure times required. But his eyes were open wide and clearly visible even in the faded print. 2 different colors, unmistakably. "This is heterochromia iridis," Nadia said more to herself than to Roland. "A difference in iris pigmentation between the 2 eyes. It can happen for several reasons. Injury, disease, a developmental anomaly. But in this context, in a black child in 1870, the most likely explanation is a genetic variant." "Is it rare?" Roland asked. "Complete heterochromia, 2 fully different colored eyes, occurs in roughly 2 out of every 1,000 people," she said. "But that's the general population. In people of West African ancestry, the combination this child appears to have, dark brown in one eye, green in the other, is dramatically rarer. It points to a very specific variant of the OCA2 gene, which governs melanin production in the iris." She set the loupe down carefully. The OCA2 variant that produces green pigmentation in one eye while leaving the other with normal melanin levels is documented in the scientific literature, but it has only been observed in living populations in one specific geographic region. Roland waited. The Volta River Basin, she said. Northern Ghana, a population cluster in the upper eastern region that has been genetically isolated for centuries due to geography. Mountains on three sides, limited contact with neighboring groups. The variant appears in roughly 1 in 4,000 people in that population. Outside of it, it is essentially absent. Roland stared at her. You're saying that child's eyes can tell us where his family came from? I'm saying, Nadia replied carefully, that if that child's DNA matches what I think it does, this photograph just became the most important piece of evidence I have ever seen. The donated materials accompanying the photograph were sparse, a small bundle of papers wrapped in oilcloth that the estate's executor had included almost as an afterthought. Roland had catalogued them briefly when they arrived, but had not examined them closely until now. Together, he and Nadia spread the contents carefully across the examination table. There was a folded land deed, partially water-damaged, for a property in the Tremaine neighborhood of New Orleans, dated 1871. There was a small prayer card from a Catholic church, the ink faded to near illegibility, and there was a single handwritten page, not a letter, but what appeared to be a partial family record, the kind that many freed black families in the post-war South kept privately, often in the absence of official documentation that had been deliberately withheld from them. The handwriting was careful and educated. At the top of the page, a name, Elias. Below it, a woman's name, Cora. And below those, 3 children listed by name and birth year. James, born 1862. Samuel, born 1865. Thomas, born 1867. Thomas, the youngest, born 1867, which would have made him 3 years old at the time of the photograph, if it was taken in 1870. Nadia photographed each document with her phone and then stood quietly for a moment, looking at the page. Elias and Cora, she said. No last names recorded. Common practice, Roland said. Many freed families in this period used only first names in private records, especially in Louisiana. Last names were complicated. Some kept the names of enslavers. Some chose new ones. Some avoided surnames entirely because of the legal and social complications they carried. Nadia nodded slowly, still looking at the page. Thomas, she said softly. The boy with 2 different colored eyes, sitting on his mother's lap, staring into a camera with the gravity of someone much older. A child born 2 years after the end of a war that had been fought, in part, so that he could exist freely. She turned back to Roland. I need to find living descendants, she said. If Thomas survived to adulthood and had children, and if they can be located, a DNA sample could confirm everything. That's 150 years of family history to trace, Roland said. I know, she replied. Where do we start? Nadia returned to Howard and spent the following 2 weeks immersed in Reconstruction-era records. The 1870 and 1880 United States federal censuses, the Freedmen's Bureau records, church baptismal registers from New Orleans parishes, and the digitized archives of the Louisiana State Archives in Baton Rouge. The challenge was immediately apparent. Elias was one of the most common names given to freed black men in the post-Civil War South. The Freedmen's Bureau records for Louisiana alone listed over 200 men named Elias in New Orleans between 1865 and 1875. Without a surname, narrowing the search was painstaking work. But the land deed gave her an anchor. The Treme property deed from 1871 listed a parcel on St. Claude Avenue. Cross-referencing that address with the 1870 census, she found a household entry. Elias, age 34, laborer. Cora, age 29. James, age 8. Samuel, age 5. Thomas, age 3. Her breath caught. The ages matched perfectly. The 1880 census showed the same family, 10 years older, still on St. Claude Avenue. Thomas was now 13, listed as attending school. His father Elias was listed as a carpenter, an upgrade from laborer, suggesting a decade of careful, deliberate progress. Then the trail went quiet. The 1890 census, the one that would have shown Thomas as a young adult, had been almost entirely destroyed in a 1921 fire at the Commerce Building in Washington, D.C. It was one of the greatest losses in American genealogical history, and it swallowed thousands of black family histories whole. The 1900 census showed a Thomas listed in New Orleans, the right age, working as a dock worker, married to a woman named Iris, 2 children. But Nadia couldn't be certain it was the same man. She called Roland. I may have him through 1900, she said, but I need to connect him to living descendants. I'm going to need genealogical help, someone who specializes in black Southern families. Roland didn't hesitate. Call Josephine Marks, he said. She's in Atlanta. She's been tracing black Louisiana families for 30 years. If Thomas has living descendants, she'll find them. Nadia wrote the name down. Outside her office window, the Washington sky was the flat gray of early spring. She looked at the photograph again, at Thomas, at his two mismatched eyes, and felt the weight of what she was trying to do settle fully onto her shoulders. "I'm coming," she thought. "Just hold on." Josephine Marks answered the phone on the second ring, and within 60 seconds, Nadia understood why Roland had recommended her without hesitation. She was 71 years old, had retired from the Atlanta public school system 20 years ago, and had spent every year since building one of the most comprehensive private databases of Black Southern genealogy in the United States. She kept the records in a converted bedroom in her house in Decatur, floor-to-ceiling shelves of binders, 3 computer monitors running simultaneously, and a wall-mounted map of Louisiana covered in colored pins. Thomas, born 1867, New Orleans, father named Elias, mother named Cora, St. Claude Avenue in Tremé, Josephine repeated back, her voice quick and precise. "Give me a week." She called back in 4 days. "I found him," she said, and Nadia could hear the satisfaction in her voice, the specific pleasure of a woman who had spent decades doing this work and still felt it every time. Thomas lived to 1931. He and his wife Iris had 4 children. 3 of them survived to adulthood. One of his granddaughters, her name was Della, moved to Chicago in 1943 during the Great Migration. Della had 2 sons. One of them, a man named Curtis, is still living. He's 83 years old, and he lives in a suburb of Chicago called Evanston. Nadia sat very still. "Does he know about the photograph?" she asked. "He doesn't know it exists," Josephine said, "but I found a phone number for his daughter. Her name is Patricia. She's in her 50s, lives in the same neighborhood. She's the one you want to call first." Nadia thanked Josephine quietly and sat for a long moment after hanging up. A living descendant, a direct line from the 3-year-old boy in the photograph, the boy with 1 brown eye and 1 green eye, sitting on his mother's lap in a New Orleans studio in 1870, to a woman named Patricia, living in Evanston, Illinois, in 2019. 149 years. The distance between then and now felt, in that moment, very small. She picked up the phone again and dialed. It rang 3 times. Then a woman's voice, warm and slightly cautious. "Hello?" "My name is Dr. Nadia Ose," she said carefully. "I'm a geneticist at Howard University, and I believe I found something that belongs to your family." Patricia drove to Evanston from her apartment in Rogers Park and met Nadia at a coffee shop 2 weeks later. Nadia had flown in from Washington specifically for the conversation. She was 54, a high school history teacher, with close-cropped natural hair and the careful, watchful quality of someone who had learned to assess situations before committing to them. She sat across from Nadia, with her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and listened without interrupting as Nadia explained everything. The photograph, the archival donation, the heterochromia, the OCA2 variant, the census trail that had led from Thomas to Della to Curtis to her. When Nadia finished, Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "My grandfather Curtis used to talk about his grandmother Della," she said finally. "She came up from New Orleans as a young woman. He said she always kept a photograph. Something very old, he said. Something she called the family picture. But that it had been lost somewhere in the move north. He looked for it for years." She paused. "He stopped talking about it when I was a teenager. I think he decided it was just gone." Nadia reached into her bag and set a high-resolution print of the photograph on the table between them. Patricia looked at it for a very long time without speaking. Her eyes moved slowly across the image, the father standing at the left, the mother seated at the center, the 2 older boys behind, and then, finally, the youngest child, the boy on his mother's lap. Her hand moved to her mouth. "The eyes," she said quietly. "Yes," Nadia said. Patricia looked up. Her own eyes, Nadia noticed for the first time, were dark brown, both of them. But around her left iris, barely visible, there was a faint, irregular ring of green pigmentation. Not full heterochromia. A trace, a residue. The gene had not disappeared. It had simply quieted, passed down through generations in a diluted form, waiting to be seen. "What does this mean?" Patricia asked. "Scientifically, I mean. What are you actually looking for?" "I need a DNA sample from you, and ideally from your father Curtis," Nadia said. "If the OCA2 variant is present in your family's genome in the configuration I believe it is, I can tell you exactly where in West Africa your family's line originates." Patricia set down her coffee. "How exactly?" she asked. "To the region," Nadia said. "Possibly to the ethnic group, maybe closer." The samples arrived at the Howard University Genetics Lab on a Thursday morning. Buccal swabs from both Patricia and her father Curtis, who had agreed to participate after a long phone call with Nadia, in which he had said very little but listened to everything. Curtis was 83 years old and had grown up hearing fragments of a story he could never fully assemble. His grandmother Della, who had raised him partially in Chicago after his own mother died young, had spoken of New Orleans with a particular mixture of pride and grief. She had told him once that their family had come from far away, further than anyone knew. He had taken it as old woman's poetry. Now he wasn't sure. Nadia and her graduate assistant, a young man named Devin, who specialized in population genomics, ran the full analysis over the following 10 days. The results were unambiguous. The OCA2 variant, present in both Patricia and Curtis, present but partially suppressed across generations of genetic blending, was a specific single nucleotide polymorphism designated RS1800-4 but occurring in conjunction with two additional rare variants on the same gene locus that together produced the distinctive iris pigmentation pattern visible in the 1870 photograph. This three-variant combination had been documented in the scientific literature only once before, in a 2014 population genetics study of communities in the Upper East region of Ghana, near the town of Baku, in a cluster of villages along the Gambaga Escarpment. The study had identified the combination in approximately 1 in 4,000 individuals in that specific population, and had noted its near-complete absence in all other populations surveyed worldwide. Devin looked up from the screen when the analysis finished. "That's remarkable," he said quietly. Nadia was already on the phone with a colleague, Dr. Kwame Asante at the University of Ghana's genetics department, someone she had collaborated with twice before and trusted completely. "Kwame," she said when he answered, "I need to know if there are living family clusters in the Baku area carrying the RS1800-407 combination with the two flanking variants I'm going to send you. I think I found a diaspora connection that goes back to the slave trade era." There was a pause on the other end. "Send me the data," Kwame said. "And Nadia, if this is what you think it is, you need to be prepared for what comes next." She looked at the photograph pinned above her desk. Thomas's two mismatched eyes looked back at her across 150 years. "I know," she said. "Send me what you find." Dr. Kwame Asante worked quickly. He cross-referenced the variant data Nadia sent him against his department's existing genomic database, one of the most comprehensive in West Africa, built over 15 years of fieldwork across 12 countries, and within a week he had a preliminary answer. The three-variant OCA2 combination existed in his database in samples from 11 individuals, all from the same geographic cluster. 4 villages in the Baku Municipal District of the Upper East region of Ghana, situated along the rocky lower slope of the Gambaga Escarpment. The villages were small, the largest had fewer than 800 residents, and had maintained a strong degree of genetic isolation due to both geography and cultural practice. They belonged to the Kusasi ethnic group, an agricultural people who had lived in the region for centuries. But what Kwame found next was what made him call Nadia immediately, rather than waiting for a written report. In the oral history records maintained by the University of Ghana's Institute of African Studies, there was a documented account, collected in 1987 from an elder in one of the 4 villages, describing the forced removal of a large number of people from the area during the late 18th century. The account named a specific event, a raid by slave traders operating through the Ashanti middleman network, targeting the Kusasi settlements along the escarpment during a period of regional instability around 1790 to 1810. The elder had named families, he had named clans, and he had described, with the precision of oral tradition preserved across generations, a man taken in one of the raids, a man known in the village as someone with one eye dark as earth, one eye light as river water. Nadia felt the room shift around her when Kwame read that line aloud over the phone. "It's him," she said. It was barely a whisper. Or his father, or his grandfather, someone in that line. "The genetic and historical evidence together are very strong," Kwame said carefully. "We cannot be 100% certain without direct genealogical documentation from the Ghanaian side, but the convergence, the variant, the geographic specificity, the oral history, the physical description, it is, by any reasonable scientific standard, compelling." "I need to go there," Nadia said. "I thought you would say that," Kwame replied. "I'll arrange it." Nadia landed in Accra on a humid Tuesday evening and drove north the following morning with Kwame, a translator named Abena, and a University of Ghana doctoral student named Fifi, who had grown up in the Upper East region and knew the area well. The drive from Accra to Baku took nearly 12 hours, north through the Ashanti region, past Kumasi, into the flat savanna of the north, where the landscape opened up and the sky became enormous. They arrived after dark and slept in a guest house in Baku town, and the following morning, Fifi drove them the last 20 kilometers to the villages along the escarpment. The village elder who received them was a man in his late 70s named Adongo. He had been briefed by the local district cultural officer about the nature of the visit, and he sat with them under a large neem tree at the edge of the compound, with the composed, unhurried manner of someone who understood that some conversations require the full weight of patience. Nadia showed him the photograph on her laptop screen, the 1870 photograph. The family of 5, posed in a New Orleans studio, dressed in their best clothes, staring into a camera. Adongo looked at the image for a long time. He did not speak immediately. Around them, the sounds of the village, children, chickens, the distant rhythm of someone working, continued without pause. Then he leaned forward and pointed to Thomas, the youngest child, on his mother's lap. He said something in Kusal that Abena translated quietly, "The eyes of the Adeline." Nadia looked at Kwame. "He recognizes the trait," Kwame murmured. "It's known in the village, associated with a specific family lineage." Adongo spoke again at length, and Abena translated in sections, carefully. The Ada family had been among those taken in the late 18th century raids. The oral history recorded their names. The trait, one dark eye, one light, had appeared in that line for as far back as anyone could remember, and it had not been seen in the village since the raids. It was considered a mark of the family, something that had gone away with them and never come back. Until now. Nadia turned the laptop toward Adongo and let him look at the photograph again. "Tell him," she said to Abena, her voice steady despite everything she was feeling, "that they survived. Tell him the family survived." The video call took 3 months to arrange. There were logistics, time zones, technology access, translation, the careful emotional preparation of everyone involved, and Nadia moved through all of it with the methodical patience that the work required. But beneath the logistics, she felt the weight of what was about to happen with a clarity she had rarely experienced in 20 years of scientific work. On a Sunday morning in November 2019, Curtis sat in his living room in Evanston with Patricia beside him, a laptop open on the coffee table. On the screen, connected from a community center in Baku, sat 3 members of the Ada family, a man named Erasmus, his sister Agnes, and an elder woman, their grandmother, who had lived her whole life on the escarpment and had heard the story of the taken ones since childhood. Nadia served as the bridge, with Abena translating from Kusal and Patricia translating family history from the American side. It was not a dramatic meeting in the cinematic sense. There were no shouts, no immediate tears, no single overwhelming moment. It was quieter than that and more profound. Curtis, who had said little through the entire process, leaned forward when the elder woman on the screen began to speak. Abena translated her words slowly. She was recounting the names from the oral history, the names of those taken, and among them a name, a man's name, the one associated with the eyes, that had been preserved in the village memory for over 200 years. Curtis listened to the name. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "My grandmother Della used to say that name. I thought it was just something old she remembered. I didn't know it meant anything." It had meant everything. It had traveled from a village on a West African escarpment across the Atlantic Ocean, through the horror of the Middle Passage, through slavery, through emancipation, through the Great Migration, through a century and a half of silence, carried in the DNA of a child who sat on his mother's lap in a New Orleans photography studio in 1870 and looked directly into a camera with one dark eye and one pale green eye. As if he knew, somehow, that someone would eventually look back. The photograph had never been just a photograph. It had been a message, written in the oldest language there is, the language of blood, of inheritance, of a family that refused to cross every possible obstacle to be erased. And now, at last, it had been read. Just a reminder, you don't need more motivation. You need a system that will make you act right now. If you want to develop discipline, eliminate procrastination, and build an unwavering mindset, click the link in the description and discover how to transform knowledge into data.